morning or afternoon, everybody. I'm Michael Munson with Forge. You are hopefully here in the right spot to be part of a conversation on body-based trauma work, strength and mobility with trans survivors. I'm here with Molly from the Breathe Network, and we are going to share some space today. It's going to be a lot of fun. We are very grateful to Tilde and to Pro Bono ASL, who we've been working with both for a little while now, with Tilde for a really long time. So thank you for all the work that you do to make this webinar and so much of the world more accessible. Um, I want to just welcome folks into this space. We have a really small group today, but I want to welcome all of you that are here into this space. We're glad that you're here. We're excited to share knowledge together today, learn from you, you learn from us, hopefully. We welcome all of who you want to bring into the room today, which is your body, your spirit, your mind, whatever it is that you want to bring into this space, we welcome it to be here. We know that we all have something to contribute, something that adds to the discussion, whether it's intentionally adding or adding in your head. So thank you for being here. Let me just share a little bit about who I am, who Forge is. Molly, if it's okay, can we wrap you in later when we start in the middle? Excellent, cool. So again, I'm Michael Munson. I'm Forge's executive director for visual description. Today I am in a hot pink cougar printed shirt. I have a grayish beard, fairly short hair, glasses. Behind me is a white wall and a little bit of a background that's black on my right side. I am happy to be your primary trainer today, and always happy to be in space with people to learn and grow more. Let me share a little bit about who Forge is. We are a 31-year-old organization, so we've been around the block many times. We've been around for a while. We are a national training and technical assistance provider, and that's the majority of our work is providing training and technical assistance to mental health providers, advocates, victim service providers across the country. We do some direct service work with trans communities and allied communities, but that's a smaller percentage of the work that we do. We're trans-led, trans-staffed. We try to be trans in our consultants and the folks that we engage with to expand our knowledge and to kind of help the world become more of a trans-positive space with different perspectives being heard and shared. An ask and offer. Some of you have heard this before if you've been at some of our webinars. What we ask of you is hopefully simple, which is that you participate in the ways that feel right for you, which can be sitting and listening. It can be turning off if you need to turn off for a while, and you can know that it's going to be recorded and on YouTube in about a week. We ask that you take care of yourself and your community. Again, whatever that means for you, whether it's drinking water or sitting on the floor or doing whatever it is that you need for you. We ask that you invite and embrace learning. Again, whatever that means for you, whether that's taking notes or listening or half tuning out or fidgeting, whatever it is that helps you learn in the best way. And we ask that you center survivors. And I know that because you're here, that's a given. What we offer is ideas and options and experiences and some of the knowledge that we have. And we hope to provide content that's trauma-informed, trans-affirming in a holistic way that brings in some hopefully wide-ranging concepts about how we talk about some of the issues that we'll talk about. So our agenda today is pretty simple. I'm going to have a few slides that I'll just get us started with to kind of talk about what are we talking about today? What is body-based trauma work? What are people's relationships to bodies and body work that can happen or movement that can happen around healing? I'll briefly share some benefits and some barriers to folks engaging in body-based trauma work and healing work. And then the majority of our time, Molly and I are going to have a conversation, which means I'm going to ask questions and Molly's going to talk because Molly is like, rock on. So We will see where that goes. We have some questions and some places that we'd like to go, but your questions will help guide that process, and we just might feel spontaneously moved to talk about some other things as we move along. So that's our agenda. So what are we talking about today? So when I say body-based trauma work, that could mean a lot of different things. And when I actually read the title of this when I was preparing, I'm like, what does that mean? What am I talking about? What do we want to talk about here today? So what we hope to talk about today are strategies, techniques, tools that people might use who are survivors that use bodies in ways of healing or accessing healing. So it might be about strength or mobility. It might be about intentional movement. So, how are we intentionally moving our bodies in ways that might help us reach a better place of healing? So, that's a really simplistic set of like, here's kind of what we're going to talk about today. What does that mean kind of in more practical terms that more of us can understand? So when I think about movement for healing, I think about things like yoga. Yoga comes up a lot, especially within trauma and survivorship spaces of like, you should go take a yoga class. I mean, it's one of those things that gets thrown around a lot, not necessarily always trauma-informed yoga, but it's something that gets mentioned a lot. But we could also be talking about things like weightlifting or strength training, things like more gentle or slower movements like Tai Chi or Qigong or Kaigong, depending on what part of the world you're from. We're talking about dance, either dance in a class or dance on, at a bar or dance in your back room or in the bathroom or in the shower. We could be talking about things like stretching, whether it's just stretching when you're waking up in the morning or more elaborate stretching of different parts of your body or all of your body or only one part of your body. We could be talking about things like swimming or being in water, whether that's swimming in the ocean or swimming laps, lots of different ways that we can engage in movement and healing in the water. We might be talking about rolling or walking or running, so things that are making us move maybe a little bit faster than some other activities. Might be talking about horse-assisted therapy, whether it's riding or touching or grooming or whatever it is that we were engaged in with horses. We might be talking about co-regulating touch. So whether that's through body work or through like partner massage with a friend, very simple touch, hands, or more parts of the body. We might be talking about things like gardening or getting into the dirt or being outside in that space, moving our body, helping grow things, both our bodies and the things that might nurture us visually or nutrient wise. Might be talking about things like forest bathing or other things that are outside and in the world. Yeah, we might be talking about massage or body work, which might be more passive or might be more active, depending on what kind of body work it is. We might be talking about things like empowerment, self-defense, or even other forms of self-defense. And there's just so many more things. And Molly and I are going to have probably a bit of a discussion about like what some of those other things are that could be included. But those are some of the things that we might be touching on today as we go. And when we look at those kinds of things, any of those kinds of things, we might be thinking about this in a way that it's formal or informal. So formal, like I'm going to go to a class and learn how to do yoga. Or no, I'm going to watch a YouTube video and I'm going to learn that way. So it could be any number of ways or both of those ways. It could be structured or unstructured. So again, kind of class structure or with other people structure or at a certain time and place structure, or it could be when I feel like it, when I want to, when it's available to me, when I'm in the space that I'm emotionally ready to do this activity. It could be with an instructor or it could be self-directed or self-learned. It could be some of both. It could be in groups of people or with one other person, or it could be solo. It could be at a specific location that you get out of your living environment or work environment and you go somewhere, or it could be in your home environment, whether that's at home within your four walls or outside your door, wherever it is. It might be going somewhere or staying somewhere. Again, it could be outside, like outside in the world, or inside, whether that's inside your home or inside a building. It could be with equipment or without equipment. So lots and lots of things. I mean, this sounds really simplistic and basic, but there's so many options for ways that people can move their bodies intentionally. And there's no right or wrong way. Hopefully, people don't get hurt in the process of moving their bodies. But there's lots of ways that we can engage. And sometimes when we trust our bodies, we know what's trauma informed, even if we don't talk about it in a trauma informed way. So I would love, folks, if you're able to type or thumb into the chat feature, when you think of movement, what is one form of movement that makes you feel good? Makes your body feel good, makes your brain feel good, makes your spirit feel good. What kind of movement makes you feel good? Qigong, dancing, stretching. Excellent, thank you. Hiking. Yep. Yeah. What else makes people feel good? Types of movement. Yoga, walking, dancing, lots of dancing. So we could be having our dance party as we're going. I can't multitask, but that would be fun to be dancing and talking and having a good time. So lots of ways that we can move our bodies. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. So a lot of us have complicated relationships with our bodies, and trauma almost indefinitely, like it almost always changes our relationship to our bodies. Different ways for different people. And Molly and I will have a little bit more of a conversation about how trauma can change our own perception of our bodies and how we are in our body or not in our body, and how our bodies might move differently according to what we might have experienced in a traumatic sort of way or in a healing sort of way. And almost everybody, I don't think I know anybody who has a clean, cool, totally rad relationship with their body. I mean, I think most of us have complicated and complex relationships. And those can get even more complicated or complex when folks are trans, when folks are survivors, when folks are living in a world that's designed for able-bodied people, for folks that are living in a world that's, or at least in our country, that's designed for white people. There's a lot of things that a lot of our bodies and a lot of our spirits don't fit neatly into. So it just makes that relationship a little bit more complicated and more beautiful in some ways to kind of pull apart and find out what works, what doesn't work, what helps our hearts sing. So I'm curious again if folks would be willing to share what are some societal messages that you think or that you know that trans people hear about their bodies? So what kinds of things go through the world about what trans people might hear about their bodies? And I know people are not always shy, so thank you for starting us off. So trans people hear that they're constantly sexualized, so they're trans people are sexual as a primary component of who they are. That we can't have any kind of comfortable relationship with our bodies of origin, right? Um, Someone's writing that they feel that people are always perceiving them and trying to figure out what their gender really is, since they're not non-binary. Messages are around trans people are seen as ugly. So there's a sense of what's beautiful, what's ugly in our culture. Um, uh, Messages are that people are trapped in the wrong body. Those are all messages that trans people hear, sometimes every day, sometimes all of those all in one day, sometimes lots more messages. And oftentimes those messages are pretty negative, pretty non-affirming, non-wonderful. You are a wonderful, whole, beautiful person. We don't hear that very much. Trans people don't. I don't think anybody else does either. But there's those layers again, that sexualizing, that ugly, that those layers of things that trans people hear frequently. Yeah, thanks for sharing, everybody. I've got three videos that we're going to share today. This is the first of two from Justice Rowe Williams, who's a coach, strength-based coach, and just a fantastic speaker. And let me just play this, and it stands on its own.
As a fitness coach, I've learned that one of the most vulnerable places to be is in our own bodies, right? In space, in time, in movement. Because no matter who we are, we've all been judged. We've all been programmed in some type of way of how to be in our bodies. We've internalized some negativity from systems about the role we should be in our bodies. Intersectionality to me, and what I would like to share with you, is using it as a tool of connection. In my body, intersectionality serves as the glue to my liberation.
So a little bit of food for thought as we move along. So a couple different concepts there about vulnerability, but also looking at intersectionality in a way that is about connection. Sometimes it's talked about in ways that pulls people apart. So again, Molly, that's just another like nugget for us to hold on to and think about as we share today. Let's explore a little bit about some of the benefits of movement and healing. And we could spend days and weeks talking about the benefits of movement. Um, Again, this wide range of movement. It might be movement of very small movements to very large movements to very little to very, lengthy. Can be lots of things, but there's lots and lots of benefits. So a lot of times when people are moving their bodies, they can feel more present in their bodies. And a lot of times survivors don't feel very present in their bodies and sometimes want to be more present. So that can be really helpful to be intentional in movement and to be intentionally more embodied. There can be some increase in confidence, whether that's having better balance and feeling like there's an ability to walk or roll down the world in a more confident way, or maybe being stronger physically with muscles, or lots of different kinds of things around posture, or however it is that confidence comes into people's bodies. Movement can sometimes help with that. For a lot of people, movement of any kind can help lower depression, lower anxiety, lower some of those mental health conditions that are oftentimes accompanying survivors, people that experience trauma. It's not always a one-to-one, but it works for a lot of people and just helping ratchet down a little bit some of those depressive symptoms. A lot of times, movement based practices can help people feel more agency, feel more in control of their own life, their own existence, their own body, their own healing, their own recovery, agency over lots of different things. And that's really important, I think, for a lot of trans folks that feel really disempowered, especially in today's world. And so having agency over something feels really good a lot of times. There can oftentimes be community connection. Even when that movement is not done with somebody else or in a class, sometimes people say, oh, yeah, you know what? I do this practice every morning, and I know that other people in the world are doing this practice too. So there can be a feeling of community and connection, even when their people are not in the same space together. And that is sometimes just really, really relieving for folks to feel like, oh my God, I am not so alone. I'm not so alone in my survivorship. I'm not so alone in my transness. I'm not so alone being a human in this world where it's really hard to be a human right now. Movement and bodies can change our cortisol levels, the stress hormones. When we move more, we tend to have lower cortisol levels. Not a one-to-one relationship, but it can help. And that can help us feel less stressed, less depressed. It can help us sleep better sometimes, which is really, really useful for a lot of folks that have challenges sleeping for any number of reasons. It can shift other neurotransmitters. We could spend days and days and days talking about which neurotransmitters do what, but the stuff in our brains can change when our bodies move. And oftentimes our brains feel a little bit better when our bodies move a little more. One of the benefits of movement-based practices is that it can be lower cost. than like having insurance or paying a therapist. So there could be some other benefits, that it's accessible, that it can be found on YouTube, it can be found in ways that don't need a lot of skilled providers in order to learn and gain skills and tools. So those are just some of the benefits. Molly and I are going to probably talk a lot more about what some of those benefits are in a little bit. Let me share a few of the barriers, and I don't want to be negative about what's going on, but it's the reality of living in the world and living with trauma and living in as a trans person, living with trauma. That there are some barriers sometimes for accessing movement-based healing modalities. So cost is a great part for the benefit, like you can do it without having to pay somebody. But sometimes we want to go to a class, we want to learn how to do something, and it costs money. So cost can be a barrier. Location can be a barrier. So whether we live in an urban area or rural area, if we live on a direct bus line or transportation line, that can be a barrier. If we want to go somewhere to be with somebody else, whether it's a class or a teacher or a friend, to do that movement with somebody. There can be lots of barriers around training. Does the person that you're seeking out to teach you something or to be in class with, are they trauma aware? Are they trans informed? Are they size neutral? Are they disability aware? Are they neurotypical, or do they understand neuroatypical brains? What is their level of training? So there could be lots of different kinds of barriers around what somebody has been trained to do in their practice. Equipment can be a barrier. Sometimes things cost money, or things cost money if you have to go somewhere. Um, and a lot of times people forget that there's a lot of ways to do things without buying expensive yoga pants or TRX trainers or lots of things. You can do a lot of things without buying equipment, but sometimes that can be a barrier to an effective movement practice. Obviously, things like transphobia and other people's biases are going to be, really primary, obvious barriers for folks who are entering spaces or wanting to be with other people in their movement. A lot of times, social conditioning comes up as a barrier of. I'm going to use kind of like my grandmother's kind of generation of things of like, well, women should not lift weights because they shouldn't be bulky and have big muscles. Well, that social conditioning, I think, is still happening today, where certain bodies are told you can look this way, but you can't look that way. So with trans people, there's a lot of layers of messaging around social conditioning, about how our bodies should look, how they should move, what size they should be, what shape they should be. And that may influence whether we want to pursue certain types of movement practices or whether we end up avoiding them. Things like disability and sizeism and ageism and all of those isms can also play a role in making it harder to access some of those movement-based practices. If we look at those, I don't want to say that those are the small barriers, but those are some barriers. I look at what's on this screen as kind of bigger barriers, more systemic, even though the other ones are systemic as well. But a lot of us live in this United States where there's a really toxic fitness culture, and it kind of gets paired oftentimes with toxic masculinity or that kind of bro gym culture. And that can be a really huge barrier, both in terms of like physical safety and danger, like people learning things that are done in this like, I'm going to be big and macho way, to just making it feel unsafe to be in that space, to not being welcoming of certain kinds of people in certain spaces. So that toxic fitness culture can be really a challenge for people to say yes to movement. Our culture is also really divided by sex and gender. So, many times a class will be designed and it's for women only. And how women is defined can be cisgender women only. It could be women of cisgender or transgender experience. But sometimes we have things that we want to attend that we can't go to because of that gender or sex segregation. For folks that are wanting to do things in those public spaces, at the gym, at a yoga studio, there might be an issue around changing spaces. Where can I change my clothes? Am I safe to change my clothes, in the room with everybody else? Is there a private room for me to go change in? What are the policies at the facility? All of those things that we talk about a lot in Forge webinars, and lot of us think about a lot. Those can be really central in if somebody's going to access external based activities. Um, we could talk forever about white supremacy culture and how that shapes and influences people and how they move their bodies, how they feel in their bodies, what bodies look like, what bodies are expected to look like. I'm going to share a video in a little bit that briefly touches on some of those components, and hopefully we can have a broader discussion about that as well. And we're living in this current day where, in a lot of places, a lot of states, trans folks are being criminalized, being accused of things that they haven't done. And this is really becoming really central in a lot of ways within sports and team activities, as well as lots of other ways. But there's a higher level of scrutiny, I think, in many of the places where fitness and movement are happening. Even in the places that are really trying to do the right thing, there's still some pressure around some of the current cultural trends right now. So those are just a few of the challenges that might get in the way of somebody accessing movement in their healing. Let me play one more video for us before Molly and I have a conversation. This video is from a really interesting hour-long video that was produced a couple years ago by the YMCA of Northern Midwest. I think it's Massachusetts. I think that's where the state was. It's got a panel of 5 trans folks talking about fitness and wellness and trans joy within bodies around fitness, wellness, and wholeness. And this clip that I'm going to share with you talks about lots of different things. It's quite a long clip. Um, so let's get comfortable and take a listen. And Molly and I will talk on the other side of this.
To give a overt invitation that I want other panelists to circle into these ideas, but this is such a beautiful entry point to the next question, right? Which is centered around within movement and embodiment, the different experiences of gender dysphoria and gender euphoria. And what I am hearing shared in different ways from everyone who's spoken before is that dysphoria, to a certain degree, is when we experience ourselves like restriction on free expression and recognition and respect of who we are and who we are showing up in the space as, and the authenticity and validity of that, when that is denied. And that a gateway to gender euphoria is being in presence in a moment where it is safe and okay to be who you are, contradictions and all, ways that we do not conform and all. Right? I think that there's a bridge here to that question that I'm going to have Ilya start off with and then open up to all the panelists about that relationship between movement and embodiment and how gender dysphoria and gender euphoria interact with that.
Thank you, Laura. And Justice, oh my God, you always bring tears to my eyes every time I hear you speak. And it just takes me to a place. I love you so much, my brother. I love you. Absolutely love you. Directly linked to our trans joy. And so I'm really want to speak from a place of, since we know how to keep each other safe and know what we need to do, let me help you. Let me take my time and my energy and start helping the world more do the things to help keep us safe. Because for me, gender dysphoria literally causes a nervous system dysregulation because the world is othering me. And for all of the ways that Justice beautifully articulated how white supremacy impacts my day-to-day life, because I'm just trying to live. I'm literally just trying to do anything that anyone else is doing. Now, with the dysregulation, I have used particularly strength training to find my way back into my body, uh, specifically intentional movement, because I think too foundational components is for anyone who is wanting to engage in movement, and for movement practitioners. Number one, you need to learn about diet culture. First of all, you need to move from an anti-oppression, anti-racist, trauma-informed, fat liberation, anti-ableist perspective. And that's not just a whole bunch of big words we're throwing around in academic language. I literally want you to dig into, you can literally just follow us and learn about every single thing I just mentioned. That's the foundational component to the work you're doing to be in right relationship, number one, with the land, which is the decolonial aspect of it, right relationship with how you feel inside of your body, right relationship with how you move and connect to the world around you in a self compassion way for you and compassion towards others. All of that is intrinsically linked. You can't do no work for you or nobody else until you have that component. And so what I had to do was dig into that. I'm still digging into that, still learning, even as I'm getting back into my movement journey for the umpteenth hundredth time, because I have a lot of chronic injuries from working out in very, very harmful ways as a trans man. Our bodies to chase a particular aesthetic, very, very gender essentialist, hegemonic views of masculinity that no one, absolutely no one can attain unless they are taking drugs or types of supplements are really damaging their body. And again, if you're not in right relationship, you're already going down the wrong path. So what I had to do was, number one, understand what nervous system dysregulation even felt like in my body, to allow for it to guide me in the ways that I needed to move, to get curious about what movement felt good in my body, to be aware of my body in space, how it moves, what it feels like moving this way, what it feels like when my feet are actually grounded, when my body and soul and spirit is grounded, when I'm now starting to get into somatic practices and all of that and all that embodies, what it feels like to move intentionally, where I'm lovingly exchanging this connection between weight and my body. All of those things were important for me to learn through my movement journey. And unfortunately, I didn't know those things when I was training with people way back in the day. I do not coach people now. I probably will, since I've opened up a home gym space. But I encourage you to also, if you are a movement practitioner, learning about diet culture and the ways that it impacts people, gender expansive and trans people who experience day-to-day body-related trauma, who feel unsafe and are often in unsafe and hostile environments, how eating disorders and disordered eating can be at play in our lives. Those of us who are moving through poverty, who don't have access to food, who are living in food deserts, understand how that could cause disordered eating or eating disorder behaviors. Also, when you're working with transmasculine clients, recognizing what eating disorder behaviors could look like in our population, and the list goes on and on and on. I don't want to take up too much space, but those are just some things that are rattling around in my head.
So hopefully that is a teaser enough to encourage you all when we're done later this week, next week, whatever, to go and watch the whole hour. Ilya is fantastic. So are the other people that are on the panel in that discussion. It is a very beautiful and rich discussion. So I'm going to pop off our slides for a second and Molly, I would love to welcome you like formally into this space. For folks that don't know, Molly is on Forge's board and is an amazing practitioner and has saved my butt a couple times in rescuing me from challenges. But hi, welcome. Thank you for being here. You want to share with folks who you are?
Yeah, hi, and thank you so much for having me. My name's Molly Bader Harris, and I use she, her pronouns. And I am on Forge's board, and I'm so honored to collaborate with your work. I'm also the director of a nonprofit called the Breathe Network, which connects sexual trauma survivors with sliding scale, trauma informed healthcare workers, and healing professionals across the United States and Canada. So our missions are very much aligned in the sense that we recognize really huge gaps in survivor care and healing that exists outside of some of the systems that survivors are often funneled towards. And we know that not all survivors have access to a lot of the mainstream systems. So I love this conversation. And the videos have been so beautiful because it's such a reminder to me that healing is available to all of us at any moment. Um, I really want to emphasize that because I do think that even in our conversations around body based healing and trauma informed care, we've still maintained a little bit of a hierarchy around practitioners and survivors. And I believe that trauma informed care is a recognition that survivors have their own medicine within them. And yes, we benefit from support and from guidance and teaching, and we can access profound healing, rolling around on the floor with music we love, or wandering through a park, or spending time with someone we love, as we can from going to a formal class. So I myself am a trauma-informed yoga teacher. I am also a somatic experiencing practitioner, which is a body-based trauma renegotiation practice. And I'm trained in co-regulatory touch. So I'm really interested in everything that Michael and the other folks who've presented in the videos are offering today. You've all done such a great job.
Woohoo. I'm wondering if we can start with you exploring a little bit more for folks. What is like trauma-informed yoga? When somebody puts that label on, adding it to yoga, what does that mean?
Yeah, trauma informed yoga to me is really recognizing the agency and respecting and honoring of the individual student, like letting that be the center of the experience versus the teacher's agenda or opinions for how a yoga practice should look or how it should feel. So, to me, trauma informed yoga is just good yoga. It's how all yoga should really be instructed. It's non-hierarchical. I teach public yoga classes and I consider them trauma informed because I start every class by giving the agency and power back to my students explicitly. And I do that by saying three things that I think are really important. And I think that they can translate into any movement space, whether we speak them explicitly or we use this framework to kind of implicitly guide our teaching. And that is at the beginning of every class, I'll say, I invite you to work with the modifications and variations that best serve you today. Um, I say, I'll invite you to honor your own breath and movement rhythm. And I invite you to choose rest, whatever rest looks like for you at any point in this practice. And so I start the practice that way. And then I offer that maybe a couple of times while I'm teaching, so that if I am teaching something where I'm being more directive, students can remember that they had those options, that they had that choice, that I'm really empowering them to listen to their own inner teacher and recognize that they have more information about their experience in the moment than I do. And so for me, though, that's kind of the biggest piece is like handing that power back over, because I think for so long in yoga spaces, it has been very hierarchical. It's that way in healthcare spaces as well. And nobody knows their own body better than the person who's inside of it. So, and that for me is also, again, just good yoga is really being present with what's coming up in the moment and being able to listen, to adapt, and to kind of redirect as is indicated by what's happening in your own body or mind or spirit. So that's a pretty general way for me of thinking about trauma-informed yoga. You can do a lot of training around it. But I really think a lot of it is about just empowering people to be their own teacher in those spaces.
That's excellent. And my internet went out in the middle of what you were saying, so I heard parts of it, which is beautiful, and I'm gonna have to go back and listen to all of it. But thank you for all of that, and just giving some examples too of what that looks like in your practice, or what people might want to look for, think about looking for, if they're going to engage with somebody else in a practice that involves somebody other than themselves. I'm wondering if we could circle back a little bit and talk about what does trauma, or what could trauma look like in people's bodies? Ilya talked about um, nervous system dysregulation. Ilya talked about things like the impact on their body just moving through the world. What would you say about how trauma impacts people's bodies?
Yeah, the impacts of trauma on a person's body are always going to be person specific. And yet, I have not met a survivor yet who doesn't feel that it had a profoundly um, physical impact. And I think when we think about bodies and we think about trauma informed care, we're also going to recognize that what happens to the body happens to the mind and happens to the spirit. That there's a relationship there that's really important. Sometimes what can happen through trauma is there's a fracturing or a sense of separation between body and mind and spirit. But I'll share just a couple of ways that I think bodies are impacted. The first one for me, especially as it relates to movement practices, is this idea of what I sometimes call an embodiment conflict. So, this is the idea that we feel really drawn to reclaim or re-inhabit our bodies. Like we feel this separation of, I'm dissociated, I may be feeling a little frozen or not like in my shape. And at the same time, we feel afraid of what we might find there. So it's a conflict because we're kind of drawn to show up inside of ourselves. And yet there is this very wise part of us that knows that by feeling ourselves more fully, we may be more exposed to some of the more difficult emotions, sensations, and memories. And so we have to be really, I think, respectful of how we navigate that conflict. And I think that's why the best approaches to trauma informed care and recovery, especially when we're thinking from a movement perspective, is slow, it's incremental, it's titrated, meaning like just little bits at a time, so that we don't overexpose somebody to their trauma memories or material that then maybe creates more of a shutdown response afterwards, or it overwhelms them all over again. In the video, they talked about nervous system dysregulation, and I think of that nervous system dysregulation as the systems that we use to regularly and reliably just maintain the status quo of some of our most basic bodily functions getting really disrupted, becoming less reliable, becoming more extreme, and behaving in ways that are unpredictable. So the nervous system can regulate things like digestion, like our heart rate, our breathing patterns, our immune system, our ability to get excited about something, our ability to just rest and relax. And so when it's dysregulated, sleep can become very difficult, whether that means we're unable to sleep or we lose energy and all we can do is sleep. It may be that we can no longer digest our food well, or we don't even have an appetite. It may mean hormonal changes that can be pretty significant. And I think that that can impact us in different ways, especially if we're taking any hormone medication or other medications. Those changes can lead to not only physical disruptions, but also psychological disruptions. And then, of course, our ability to access rest and a sense of safety becomes disrupted, because if we haven't been met with the kinds of healing resources that allow us to create an understanding that the most acute parts of that trauma have completed. And I hold that pretty lightly, because there's one thing, I think, as a person to survive sexual trauma, and then there's another thing to live in a culture that is on a daily level sending signals of threat and lack of safety. When we think about systemic forms of trauma like racism and sexism and transphobia and homophobia and ableism. So when there is that lack of safety, whether that's an acute lack of safety or it's systemic, our body is going to be ready to respond to that lack of safety. So one of the most important things I hope that people know, if you don't know this already, I hope that you can hold this and hold your own experience and that of your clients with greater compassion and grace, is that these big responses that trauma survivors might experience, these big feelings of hypervigilance or hypo responses where we're really like without energy and we can't even mobilize a response to threat, make a lot of sense on a physiological level, make sense at a survival level. Evolutionarily, we were meant to have these different ways of responding, whether that's the more active responses like fight or flight, or the seemingly quieter response of freeze. That's how humans have been able to evolve and survive over time. So these are really right responses, but they're meant to be short-lived. And in a culture where survivors, specifically sexual trauma survivors, and more specifically, Trans and non-binary survivors have very limited access to the kinds of resources that meet their bodies and meet the physiology in a way that allows them to kind of work through that lack of safety and allows them to start to reclaim it and find it in their own shape, but also in their community. It makes sense that they're going to live from a place of being ready to respond or being so protected that it's hard to even meet the world outside of your own individual experience. So what I love about movement practices, I'm going to try to weave this together because I know I've been speaking for a while, but what I love about movement practices is we are actually accessing the same systems of our body and brain and spirit that helped us to survive the trauma, that then helped us to cope with the impacts of trauma, to now help us recover from the trauma. And eventually, I think, or I believe that these body-based practices become less about trauma recovery and more about celebrating being in our bodies. And I really want to emphasize that in a culture that says the body keeps the score, the body remembers. In some ways, we've almost pathologized the body as just this like trauma vortex, where if we go inward, all we'll find is our pain. And I really want to be clear that when we go inside, yes, we will find pain and there will be discomfort. And alongside that, we're going to find those resources of joy and belonging and connection that allow us to hold the hard things, allow us to connect with other people, and give us a greater capacity to thrive in our lives, even with the ways that the world presses on us. So I hope that I hope that that is helpful in some way, just to contextualize the impacts along with the resources that the body delivers.
Mhm. I love what you just said. I mean, you said about when we asked the question earlier about what movement feels good to folks. Many people said dancing, and I tend to think of dancing as something that's celebratory. It's joyous. It's something that feels good. Um, it- which I just think is interesting when we look at movement-based things, which of the things do people engage in that makes their body feel better, makes their body feel worse, like temporarily or in the long term. I mean, sometimes people go and lift weights and they lift weights till they can't, till they exert, they can't exert anymore. And it's a painful process for them. Whereas other people are going dancing, which is like, they might be sore the next day, but it's a different kind of feeling. I'm curious about what are the tool bag? What's in the tool bag of things that help people access those feelings of wholeness and maybe the not so broken feelings?
Ooh, okay. Um, well, the biggest element in the tool bag is the feedback of your own body. That's really something to listen to and to follow. And that's where I think our, initial entry into movement practices or body-based trauma healing modalities is really an exploratory process. So a lot of people might tell you, oh, yoga is so good for trauma recovery. And if you go to yoga and you realize it's just not for you, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. That doesn't mean that movement isn't right for you. It just means maybe that practice isn't right at this time. And maybe it'll never be right. And that's okay. Like, I love yoga, But I'm the first to tell people, like, oh, try something else then if that doesn't work for you. Um, I think it's really important that we find a practice that we love, that we want to return to, versus finding the practice that other people have said is what offers us healing. This is an area of my specific interest in terms of what kinds of healing modalities get funded and are made accessible to survivors tend to be different than what survivors themselves have told us helps them heal. So we don't see dance movement therapy being funded, or just dance classes, or
Mhm.
aerobics classes, or weightlifting, or equine assisted therapy. We see more classic cognitive oriented therapies being the ones that survivors can maybe access with insurance or at their local rape crisis center. So there's a little bit of a turn happening right now, I believe, towards survivors' own expertise and wisdom. And that's been a real value of mine with the Breathe Network, that those modalities that you mentioned on your earlier slide, ranging from dance to being in nature to yoga, stretching, weightlifting, working with animals like horses and dogs, that's what I've learned from survivors is helpful. And that's what I want to make more accessible. Um, in terms of like the tool bag that was your question,
Yeah.
your own direct experience. So, what helps you feel a little bit more here in your own shape, can often be something to follow. What allows you, knowing your own system, to feel like you're a little bit closer to yourself. So maybe for those of us who feel like we're a little bit more freezy and stuck and lethargic, we do a certain practice and we feel like, wow, I've got some new energy. I feel like I can go and run errands today, or I can connect with other humans and make some phone calls or meet a friend for lunch. Whereas somebody else might feel like they are very vigilant all the time and it's hard to slow down, and they do a practice that helps them feel like they can breathe more slowly, where their muscular body feels like it's not gripping so much anymore. Like those indicators for me are usually indicators that we're moving in the right direction. But even before we get into a space, I think developing a practice that can be really simple of how you orient yourself to the here and now is really important. And I do that kind of a practice before I do most things, whether it's public speaking, whether it's going to meet some friends in a public space, whether it's doing a yoga practice, whether it's getting ready to go to therapy, of like, how do I let my nervous system, um, and you can think about like, how do I let my body know, or how do I just let my brain know, or my spirit know that right now, um, to a certain degree, I'm safe enough to do this next thing. And if when I do that practice, I get feedback that I'm not safe enough, then maybe there's a different intervention I need to
Mhm.
do. But one of the things I first do is I look around a space that I'm in. So I use either my eyes to look around, or I can use other sense organs to track my space. So if I'm vision impaired, I might use my auditory senses. I might also smell. I might touch the environment around me just to give myself a sense of location. Like I'm in my apartment, or I'm sitting in my car, or I can see where the exits are in this restaurant or in this waiting room. I get a sense of the smell of my own essential oil that I put on this morning, and I'm just going to sniff my wrists to notice that. Cues that tell me this is happening right now. And then I might notice how I'm breathing, or just notice that I am breathing. Because sometimes if I feel like I have to take a deep breath or a smooth breath, it creates the opposite reaction. Then I'm like, "Oh, it's hard for me to breathe." So sometimes I'm just like, I'm in a body, and my body's breathing right now. And that's all I need to let my attention rest into. And then for me, sometimes a little bit of a movement is another way to like orient. So I'll sway a little bit, or I'll press my feet into the ground, or I'll rub my thigh bones or rub my arms, just a little, or I'll give myself like a little squeeze to kind of give my hands something to do and to kind of feel like the physical body more tangibly. Those are just some simple-ish sounding practices that can actually create a really big impact. And those are things I'll often do when I'm working in my private practice with my clients. I'll invite them to do any of those practices that feel meaningful to them. And that tends to then help us then do whatever is the next thing. It's really hard to turn your attention towards your body or to go inward or to even listen to the directions of a teacher when you're a little bit worried on some level of whether or not you're safe somewhere. And I also know that, like, we can't guarantee safety in any of these spaces. Safety is something that is sort of conditional. It has to do a lot with the environment, it has to do with the relationship, it has to do with just what's happening within our own body. But we might feel safer or safe enough to turn down some of that vigilance and looking outward to then maybe pay attention a little bit more either to the teacher or to what's happening inside our own shape.
As you were talking, I was thinking about how it seems like, I don't know where it started, with the beginning of COVID 6 years ago, or with the increase in anti-trans systemic violence. But, I certainly am seeing more providers and trans community members saying, like, hey, I'm staying at home. I'm finding ways of being in my own space where it is the safest for me, because leaving my house is not safe enough. I don't feel safe enough to go to a class, and which is really sad, and it's really really hard, and it does things to our body. And at the same time, it's really, really beautiful that we now have a world where we can be on Zoom with people. We can, get equipment sent to our house if we have the finances to do that, or a safe place to have mail sent. And we can create that environment within our safer space when the world has become just so potent. And I'm not trying to say that it's not ever okay or not ever safe enough to go out in the world, but for a lot of folks that is the reality of, like, I need to be in my space, and I'm only going to go out when I absolutely have to, and I'm not going to go out for something that I want to do, even if it's for my healing. So
I
um,
agree. I think that's why, I've seen, I think it's really problematic when I hear people in like mainstream culture say like we've got to get off Zoom or that you can't do things like yoga on Zoom. It's just not as good, or somatic experiencing. It's just not as good. I'm like, actually, it's been a doorway. It's made it accessible for so many of my clients to do this work. I have a lot of clients that will never take a yoga class with me in person, that will never do somatic experiencing with me in person. So it's really important that practitioners find ways, if they are trauma informed, to offer virtual practices and to also be really clear that having cameras off is perfectly fine.
it is, yeah.
Um, to even lead with that, like you're welcome to have your camera on if you want, or just keep it off. Because it's also true that this format on a screen is also can feel a little bit threatening for our
Mhm.
nervous systems because it
Right.
can feel like we're being watched
Yeah.
in a different way. We also can see ourselves.
Mhm.
So like turning off the camera can feel really, really nice. And so I really am glad you mentioned that. And it's been one of the gifts of COVID is that we've made healing more accessible to more people.
Hmm. Hmm. You just brought up, kind of seeing ourselves can feel sometimes. I don't know what word you just used, but in my head, I went to like, oh yeah, I remember the very beginning of COVID when a lot of young trans people were like going to school and being on Zoom and being required to be on camera, and it created so much dysphoria for them because like normally they weren't looking in the mirror, but these folks now, these young trans people were like looking at themselves all day long, and it was causing an increase in dysphoria. So like, I mean, what you just said is kind of like, yeah, sometimes we need to turn it off for us, for feeling safer, for feeling better in our bodies. We don't need to see ourselves on the screen to make it be a worthwhile experience or even a healing experience. Um,
Totally agree.
yeah. Um, I'm wondering, with our time left, we've got about 20 minutes left. Um, I am wondering if folks that are with us have questions that they would like to ask. Molly, I'm interested in where you would like to go. If you have a place that you'd like to travel that we haven't gone yet, I have more questions that I can ask, but
I I think it's a great idea to open it up to the group because there's so much we could cover, and I think it might be most interesting for all of you who've heard us talk now for a while, to have your own questions or insights shared in the space if that feels right to you.
yeah, yeah, I would love that too. And as we're
Mike-
giving folks,
Michael and I are both, we can both carry on for quite some time with each other.
Mhm,
So it's great to have other voices represented.
totally
Hey, this is Emil. A question did come in through the Q&A earlier.
great.
I can read that for y'all.
Thank you.
So this person says, I work with fellow disabled folks in Las Vegas. If I am trying to find body-based trauma-informed practitioners, what characteristics or traits should I look for?
Mhm, great. Thank you. Molly, do you want to?
Sure. So I have a couple of ideas. One is looking for that practitioner acknowledging somewhere in their materials, whether they have a website, or maybe they have a designated space like a studio that they've done trauma-informed training. I would look for that explicit language when wanting to work with someone. When I do like a search for providers, I will include trauma informed, trauma trained, whether it's like a trauma trained body worker, trauma trained yoga instructor. And usually that will point me in the right direction. You can also reach out, this is a Forge event, but I would also say you could reach out to the Breathe Network, because part of our work has been to build those networks of providers who are trauma trained in a variety of modalities. And when we don't have a provider in a certain location, what I will do is I will turn towards the network that we do have and I'll say, hey, we're looking for a trauma informed body worker in Las Vegas, or we're looking for a trauma informed yoga teacher in Miami. Who do you know that you trust and recommend? So I'll use my network to get to that next network of trauma informed practitioners. But for me, like I think seeing that language being explicit and how they speak about their work is going to signal to me that they are somebody that I might consider working with. And then I might reach out to them. So I might ask them in an email or if there's a place on their website to explain to me, like, do they have experience working with trauma survivors? What does trauma informed care mean to them? What does that look like in their space? Um, I think that we have been conditioned in this culture to not ask questions or to just hand over power to providers. And trauma-informed care best unfolds when the practitioner or when the client receiving the practice feels like they hold as much agency as their provider, that they're kind of co-creating a space together and that they get to ask as many questions as they want before moving forward. One more thing I'll say is a lot of trauma-informed practitioners will offer you like a conversation. So, whether it's a yoga teacher or a body worker or a psychotherapist, most of the folks that I know, my colleagues, will say, hey, we can do a Zoom call for 15 minutes or a phone call, or just do an email conversation to see what your questions are, to see if I might be a good fit. And then if I'm not a good fit, I would love to work with you to help you find a better fit. I feel like a lot of my intro conversations, I'm not invested in that person working with me. I'm like, well, if I'm not the right person, if we learn something through the conversation that seems like this isn't a match, let's see if I can point you towards somebody else who might be a better fit. So that might be a few starting places, like the networking with other trauma trained professionals, looking for those signals of I've done trauma training, like they have a certificate, they've studied with trauma informed practitioners, they speak about their own experience and the value of trauma informed care, or they're willing and receptive to your questions and curiosities versus being like defensive or just expecting you to show up without knowing a little bit about where they're coming from.
I wanted to add just a little tiny bit to what
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
said, which I think that, if we're in a role, in a helping professional role, and can do some of that pre-screening for somebody. So if a complimentary, like a discovery call is available and the person doesn't want to put their vulnerability on the line, can somebody else do some of those pre-screening questions? That can be helpful. Even if like this person is in the same room and you can, kind of do some of that navigating. But when you were talking about it, I was thinking that I think for a lot of trans survivors, it feels like I am just too much. I'm like, I need somebody that's trauma informed. I need somebody that's trans aware. I'm neurodiverse. I'm this. There's like, I think a lot of trans survivors just go through their head and like, I just, there's not going to be anyone that can work with all of me because I have so many things. And, in reality, we all have so many things, whether we're trans or not, whether we're a survivor or not. And it just taps into the like sometimes we think we're looking for this one skill in somebody, but we really want to make sure that they have all these other things too. Otherwise we don't feel okay enough to even tap the door open a little tiny bit. And that was kind of really negative to share like that, but like I just think that's the reality for so many folks. It's just like, oh my God, I feel like just hopeless because I can't, can I bring my whole self to a space? And I shouldn't leave on
Yeah, and
an end, but yeah.
a good provider will know their scope of practice. They will not pretend to have expertise in a theme or community or population or system of the body that they are not trained in. I think that scope of practice is so important. And that's why networking, whether you're in the advocacy realm, the healthcare realm, or the healing realm, is so important so that you have a community that you can refer to and different networks of care so that you as a provider can stay within your scope and not feel like you're letting somebody down if you don't offer everything. I don't believe one provider can offer everything, but they can support pieces of our experience. And then they can help us connect with other folks who can support other pieces of that experience so that we do feel like our whole self is being met. And that sense of too muchness is a really common experience I would say across the board for trauma survivors of because that's what we've been told our whole lives is our experience is too much, that it's too complicated, that we are too much. And so I think that that actually is a really important piece of trauma-informed care is to actually address that at the onset, that no one person is too much, that their fullness is welcome. That doesn't mean you can hold every aspect of it, but it's really, really important for a survivor to know that like their too muchness is actually just this bigness and this fullness and this like bounty that we get to hold together. And we're going to build those big arms to hold the fullness of them so that they can actually expand. Like trauma is so much the experience of contraction and hiding and having to disappear physically, emotionally, spiritually. And I feel like healing is about getting to get bigger and to expand and to take up as much space as we want to. And so I can do that with my clients and also say, hey, this piece that you're bringing to me, I think a clinical psychologist or your psychiatrist or a physical therapist could hold better than I can. But here's what I can hold today. And here's how we can acknowledge that part of your experience without unpacking it fully in this space, but we can let it be here with us.
Great, cool. I'm seeing one more question in the Q&A, and then I'd like to wrap us up with some resources. So the question in the Q&A is, where can you find free or low-cost professional trainings for various modalities to help build capacity? So looking specifically around Maryland.
Hmm.
Molly, do you have any ideas for
Yeah,
that?
so yes, I have a great idea. So this isn't Maryland specific. This is through the Breathe Network. We offer 20-hour and 40-hour professional trainings that are really comprehensive in terms of the modalities that we cover on purpose. So, our professional trainings are sort of at the intersection of sexual trauma, healthcare, healing, and advocacy, because it's my belief and that of many of my colleagues that we all need to be in conversation with each other. And the trainings that we offer will cover things like trauma informed body work, yoga, acupuncture, movement, um, advocacy responses, working with specific trauma survivor populations, whether we're talking about survivors of childhood sexual abuse, trans and non binary survivors, survivors with disabilities, BIPOC survivors, folks that are living with all of those identities and seeking support that can really be intersectional, as we talked about earlier, holding all of those layers of their experience without having to like separate them out. We offer these trainings on a sliding scale. We offer these trainings with scholarships as well. So if someone's listening that is looking for that kind of professional training, you can send me an email, Molly at thebreathenetwork.org. Michael might be, I can put my email in the chat as well. And I'd love to show you our trainings. You can look at the curriculum, see if it feels like it's a fit. And if it's not, then I'm also happy to think through with you what are some organizations and trainers offering something that might be similar, that is more accessible or specific to Maryland. I just think of the Breathe Network because I think that we cover such a range of modalities. And I think of it because we include practitioners and advocates in their own need to attend to their own healing and health and wellness and self-care as a really critical component of trauma-informed care. Trauma-informed care is not just something that we offer to other people, it's a way we also inhabit our own bodies and relationships and tend to ourselves, because that has a direct effect on the communities that we serve. And our own wellness is as important as anybody else's wellness. So, and it's related to and connected to the healing of all of our communities. So I think that that's also a really important piece that we offer in those trainings. But Michael, you might have, I mean, Forge, you all have so many amazing trainings as well that you might want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure the question is specifically around body-based modalities, which we don't have a lot of trainings on. I do want to say that, I know Molly, you have really been done a really good job of having people support your trainings that are of many identities, lived identities and experiences, as well as, a lot of folks that are just really incredibly trans-informed, on top of being trauma-informed. So, another plug for connecting with you and some of the stuff that you offer. Yeah. I will think about it, and we can circle back in email. I'm also seeing that there's another Q&A question, and I would like to follow up with this person directly afterwards, if that's okay, where we have a little bit more time and space with that. Molly, is there anything that you want to add before we do a couple of resources and wrap up today?
I would just add that I'm a resource for any follow-up questions related to accessing healing support for you as an individual or for your clients and folks you work with or organizations. I'm here, so please don't hesitate to connect.
Great, thank you. And we'll send out a resource that has where to find you and where to contact you, and some additional stuff for folks. Um, so as we kind of reach the end of our time, I just wanted to share one more short video and just a reminder of where you can find both Molly and Forge, so that you can stay connected. This last video is another one with Justice Williams, and let's take a listen.
I'm going to start with home, because in the beginning of this summit, we did a land acknowledgement. In the beginning of my workshop, we're going to do a body acknowledgement. I acknowledge that I am in this body. That being grounded is finding yourself just as you are within. It's knowing you are connected. Connected to the land. Connected to the sun and the moon. Connected to each other. Connected to what hurts and connected to what heals. I acknowledge that movement is not determined by my body alone. And acceptance means being uncomfortable, being aware of what you hold as we continue to hold each other. I acknowledge that I am part of a larger community of bodies. That moving beyond difference means being exposed to the experiences of others, our clients, and our greater community, society itself. I acknowledge that I have been misinformed about my body and the bodies of those around me. This includes the land. I acknowledge that love is something greater than me, and that with love, I am responsible for maintaining and creating relationships in a more sustainable way that brings us all towards connection, equity, and justice for all bodies.
We will send out where you can listen more to Justice and Ilya and a couple of other folks that you might find fascinating and interesting and thought filled and thought provoking. Just a couple of really quick references to the Breathe Network, to Ilya's Decolonizing Fitness, and to Justice Williams. Again, we'll send those out in the follow-up email that you'll get tomorrow, which will have clickable links that you can get to more easily. You can find the Breathe Network and Forge on the socials. We love being friendly with folks, where I think both of our organizations share out our resources as well as other people's content. So come and find us and learn more about what else is coming up. You can find me and Molly here. Again, we'll send you a note tomorrow that shares where you can find us. And we're really grateful that you were all here today. We're grateful for our interpreters who are so rock solid and wonderful. And thank you, Molly, for sharing all of you today and sharing the space with me. So thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your afternoon.